if it's normal and if it's only mean, but we can't hear you. Okay.
You can't what?
No, it's okay.
Okay, so we're going to start now. This is then today the last part of this seminar on scientific writing. It's about the discussion and about some general tips with regards to how to write productively. So the discussion is the last part of a scientific paper, and it goes the other direction than the introduction. It goes from special to general. Special means so your specific results, what you have found in your study, and general means what do your results mean for other people that work on other species, on other taxa, but on kind of the same topic. Thus, in the discussion, you try to put your specific findings into a more general context, which is in contrast to the introduction. It goes the other way around. There you start with a general context, and then you come to your specific questions. And then mainly every paragraph, except maybe the first and the last one, is structured exactly like this, going from special to general. You start with stating what you found. That can then be the topic sentence of this paragraph. Then you put this in context with other studies, with examples. For example, you say in striped mice, we found that individuals recognize each other individually. Similar results have been found in hamsters and in kangaroo rats. And then you conclude with a general statement that's in the terminator sentence. It should give an overall conclusion. It could be in this example, which is only fictive, could be that in vivo recognition seems to be widely common in small mammals. And the structure of the paragraphs, it means how the paragraphs follow each other, go in a similar way, meaning you start with specific ones, and then you start with more, then you end with more general paragraphs. So for every prediction that you had in the introduction, the results must be discussed. And normally, if you have maybe 3 predictions in the introduction, then you will have 3 paragraphs where first prediction 1, then prediction 2, and then prediction 3 is discussed. So the question is, what do the results tell us in a general context? What are the main and the general conclusions? And a good discussion has typically between 4 and 8 paragraphs. And the first paragraph and the last paragraph are kind of always have the same topic. In the first one, you have a summary of the main results. You shouldn't bring everything here, but only the most important things, and not only describing what you found, not only a repetition, but also what it means. And then put it in even broader context in the last paragraph. That are the general conclusions. For example, when I read a paper from somebody else, often I first read only the first and the last paragraph of the discussion, because here the main results and what they really mean is normally summarized. And then the second paragraph would be about result 1. What does it mean? What did other studies find? So these are other examples, and what are alternative explanations? And then here should be written then the general conclusion out of it, the terminator sentence. The same for result, it should be 2 and 3. And then, depending on the study, there can be 1 or 2 paragraphs that put these 3 results in general context to combine them before you come to the conclusions. And if you follow this structure, then it should be pretty clear what your study is about. So don't try to explain too much in the discussion. Be specific with what you can say and not what you can't say. Often the problem is when people have to write something like a master thesis, then the university and supervisors ask them to write 1 or 2 paragraphs about limits of the study. But in scientific publication, this is rarely done. Normally in a scientific publication, you do it a proper way by only saying what you can say. You're not making any exaggerated statements. So avoid criticism by making too strong statements. Just say what can be said, but say this very clearly, and have some take-home messages at the end. A good way again to think about this is when you think about what would you like your study to be cited for in the future. For example, maybe you want it to be cited to say that multiple paternity in European pond turtles is relatively rare, especially when the sire is a bright yellow male. Then it should be easily possible to find in either the first or last paragraph this statement for people to cite your paper later like this. So scientific writing is always about making other people aware of your study so that they can cite it in the future. So if you think about how you would like your paper to be cited, and you make 3 statements, and if your paper gets cited for 3 different statements and it's really a very good paper, if you make this clear, then it will help you a lot how to write the discussion and the take-home messages. But often there will be only one thing for which a paper can be cited, but this should be a clear result in a clear statement. So if you just discuss writing your discussion here, nothing is really clear, and we need many more studies here and many more studies there, then it's not really very worthwhile. Also, when you see you have in your discussion statements that you could have done without your study, then it indicates that there's something wrong. Because in the discussion, you should show what we know now more that we didn't know before. But if your statement could be done without you ever having done the study, then there's a problem. And typically the problem is that people try to say more than they can really do. But remember, if you can just make one clear statement for which the paper can be cited, then it's a worthwhile contribution to science. A colleague of mine formerly said that a good PhD thesis is something that results into one sentence in a textbook. So just to put this into context, no, you cannot expect that due to your study, the entire field will be written on you. But if you can make one clear statement, then it is really a success. And avoid to make any overstatements, which is not necessary. Are there any questions with regard to the discussion before I come to general tips about scientific writing that are especially important for the discussion, but also for the introduction?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm not sure about what you said about the limit of the method of the result, or I don't know the
limitation of the method should be represented in the way that you don't make statements which you cannot do because your method was not good enough. You should, in a scientific paper, you should rather focus on what you can say and not on what you cannot say. But if you really only make statements which are very well shown by your methods and your study, then this is enough. Of course, you can include statements, especially within where you discuss the results. In future, it would be nice to have an experimental approach about the color of European pond turtles by painting them. Then, of course, this is something obvious, but don't write, actually, my results don't really mean anything because I couldn't do the proper experiment. If that's your conclusion, then it's kind of pointless. So in a scientific paper, it's more important to make statements that you can clearly support than to make statements about what you cannot support.
Okay. Thank you.
So then we come to some techniques that are especially important for discussion, but partly also for the introduction and the abstract that we discussed before. The first is called the ambush technique. So if you don't really know what to write, what is the entire story, then just go out of your office. Now in Corona times, it's difficult, but go to someone else and tell the person what you want to write about. And then when you change the context from sitting in front of the computer with Word and being stressed to having somebody to tell, then your mind often gets much clearer and you get down to the points that are really important. So that this might help you to clarify what is really the story of your paper. The other technique is what I tried to teach you from the beginning, is the structure technique, to have a good structure from the beginning. And here it means, especially for the discussion, but also introduction, that you mark your topic sentence and terminator sentence of the paragraphs in 2 different colors. And then you read through your discussion only topic, terminator, and so on. And then you will see whether there's a good flow in the way of argument, if it makes sense and is understandable or not. And then you might be able to identify where there's a logical problem. It will also help you to identify if you're missing a terminator sentence, which is often the case in manuscripts. And it can also help you to see whether the terminator sentence of one paragraph is nicely connected to by the topic sentence of the next paragraph. Especially when you worked for, you might have this at the beginning, but then you work for many times on a manuscript, also with co-authors, and then the structure might get damaged by this. And then at the end, coming back to this technique might help you to identify where there is a problem in the flow of reading. The email technique is similar to the ambush technique, but if you can't go to the office of someone else and you want to explain something that is complicated or the entire story, and you get stuck with the writing of the scientific paper, then you just write an email to a good friend or colleague and say, actually, I'm working at the moment on a paper about alternative reproductive tactics in striped mice, and we found another tactic, and I don't really know how to put this other tactic in context. They are like this. Then by changing the way again of communication from very formal in a scientific paper to talking to a colleague, you might then get much clearer about what is really the difference between this new tactic you observed related to the other ones than while you try to write it. And here, like with the ambush technique, the important thing is that when you have to quickly tell a story, you get rid of all the extra information you have, that it might be way too detailed, and to really give people an insight about what you're working on. The sketch technique is with sketch or graph, means when you have something very complex to explain, right? You might have 3 experiments, have to put the results in context. It might be very useful to make a graph or flow diagram or something where you put these different results in relation to each other. And then it might help you to more easily explain in writing how these different factors interact with each other. And also, it can be quite helpful if you have a bigger study for your discussion to even include such a graph within the discussion. It can then happen that the referees say they don't need this graph, you should take it out from your paper. But because the graph was in the paper, the referee understood your discussion, and she might not have understood it without the graph. So even if it's deleted at a later stage, it might have helped you to get through the review process, because the referee, even though he thinks it's not important to be included in a manuscript, he had a look at it and then he understood it more easily. And even if it would be excluded from the final manuscript, you can then still use it when you're giving some presentations at a conference or whatsoever. A graph like this will be always very helpful when you present your results elsewhere. So it's clearly no waste of time to make this. And when you have a complex study or you use many different techniques, it will help you how to structure your discussion properly. The 2 sentences only technique relates to the fact that if one gets stuck with writing, often people start reading everything in the paper and not really making any progress. So this technique says when you get stuck, then don't read everything, only go back 2 sentences, because what you want to write now has to connect to the 2 previous sentences, and then don't look at everything from the beginning on again. It can also be used the other way, that the 2 sentences you look at are only the topic sentence and the terminator sentence of the paragraph are you're working on, that you look only on these 2 sentences, and what you have to write now has to fit in between these 2. The delete technique is one of the most important techniques, so even though people don't like it, but people would have saved a lot of time and nerves if they would use it more often. if you write something and you get stuck and gets too complicated, you work on it again and again, the best thing might be to delete all of it and start anew. Because people don't like to do it because they think they will lose a lot of work, but actually most of the work you have done is in your head and you have all the information in your head, but it is somehow not properly structured within the text. And it might be even much quicker to delete everything and start writing what you know from the beginning. It might also lead to a much better version. This is especially the case for students who wrote something like a master thesis, then want to write a paper. They spend a lot of time writing a very detailed introduction for the master thesis, but often these introductions for university are way too detailed for real scientific paper. And the student has all the knowledge, but they want to use the previous version, and then it gets too much details, too many things for a real paper, and it doesn't end up to a good introduction for a paper, but to a lot of work. And then I always recommend just delete all of it and start writing anew, because you're not really losing anything because you have all the knowledge in your mind, but to structure it properly, it's better to start from the beginning. It can also be sometimes useful for a paragraph, especially if the paragraph doesn't fit well with the other ones. Then delete it, think about what did you really want to say, and start again with first having a proper topic and terminator sentence that for this paragraph that you put in between two other paragraphs, and then write it anew. Then after you wrote everything, then it's the time to make corrections, to check it again, give it to co-workers, which is also a lot of work. So editing the text and proofreading it. Because once your first version is finished, it's still a very, very long way to the final version. And don't expect your first version having to be perfect. It will never be perfect. Get instead advice and feedback in time and from the correct person. And especially when you send it to your co-workers or your supervisor, never put in the file name final version, because there's only one final version, that's the published one. And all the other versions are not final, and you will always get comments, and it's a bit annoying if you put this name in it, showing you don't want to work on it anymore, even though clearly one needs more work. And this is, everybody knows it's always going to be like that. So the techniques to help you checking the manuscript yourself again is, one is the time technique. Often it is good to let the manuscript rest for a week or months and then coming back to it to read it with a fresh mind. Then there's a crime scene technique. You might have written the manuscript for many weeks or months in your office, and you really can't see it anymore. You worked so much on it, and if when you look at it, you don't even see the manuscript, you see what is in your head, and then to take it and read it somewhere else might be quite helpful. For example, at the department, often before I submit a manuscript, I print it out and I go into the bibliothèque of the DEP and read it there one last time to have a new environment to really read the paper and not to read what I think should be written there. The format technique is related to this because you know the manuscript so well, but then by changing the font or the font size or the this line spacing, then to look it, make it, you can use this to make it look different so that you can really read again what is written there, and you don't read what is already kind of imprinted into your brain. And especially for a paragraph where you might have problems, the read out loud technique is that you read the paragraph to a friend or to yourself in front of the mirror, and when you read it out loud, instead of reading it in your mind, you might better hear and realize where there's a problem in the writing and in the flow of the writing. Then you have to get comments. You should get the comments at the right time and from the right people. So especially from your supervisor, you should get comments on your structure. You should first make a structure of the manuscript and then send it to her or him to get agreement on it, because if you spend a lot of writing and later your supervisor thinks there should have been another line of argument, there should have been other paragraphs, then you lost a lot of time. Then when you have specific questions, and you should ask them specifically. For example, not just say, oh, I don't know really how to write on, but specify what is the problem, why you're getting stuck, for example, somewhere in the discussion. Also, normally, for me, I often prefer to get a full version of the manuscript instead getting one part after the other part. Now, with new students, often it is useful to first comment on the introduction, and then she writes the methods and then the results, and comment on every part once. But at least for a PhD student, when she's more experienced than for the second manuscript, it's then more useful to get a full version where everything is together. And why is this the case? It's because important for the structure is that the questions from the introduction are represented in the materials and the results in the discussion, and checking this structure is one of the most important things. And this you can obviously only do if you have the full manuscript. Before, it doesn't make much sense. But then here, of course, this depends on your supervisor, and you should talk to her beforehand and make an agreement how you want to handle this. And it's important to get comments from the right people. Don't be shy to ask your colleagues, other students, to comment on it. They can learn something from it. You learn something from it. And it's important that somebody check, for example, for basic mistakes in the grammar and in the spelling before you give it to your supervisor, because checking grammar and spelling takes a lot of attention away, and then this person will have less nerves to focus on the more important parts. If there's a manuscript full with spelling errors, one has to correct all of this, then automatically one cannot focus on scientifically more important things. And don't get upset when you get too many comments and edits. Normally, manuscripts are always totally read and changed for many times. Also, when I work together with experienced scientists on a co-paper, we comment a lot on each other's papers, and there's a lot of editing and changes. Sometimes one realizes students, they work very hard, and then they get very upset when they get so many comments back. But this is not because the student is bad, but because it always goes like this. So you have to expect this and don't get upset because of that. You can then still, of course, ask your supervisor what his or her opinion is on it and how you can improve. And this might help you. For example, I once had a student who wrote a very nice manuscript with all the information that was needed, but she had it kind of in the wrong order, and it was very quick to reorder it. But by reordering it, everything was red, and she was totally shocked. And I said, yeah, but don't be upset. I mean, it's a much better manuscript than I normally get. I only had to reorder it, and then everything looks red, but actually all the information was in there. And this is actually the most important thing, that there's all the information that is needed and no surplus information that is not needed. If this is in the manuscript, then restructuring it is relatively easy. But I think that was the last slide, I assume. Yes. So are there any comments or questions with regards to that? Anyone?